Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a recent hull and machinery claim settlement for cargo vessel appears to have been finalized based on an initial surveyor's report that may not have fully accounted for the extent of corrosion damage identified in a subsequent, less formal, internal assessment by a senior engineer. The claims handler expedited the settlement to meet internal performance targets for claim closure times. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler to take now, considering the need to uphold regulatory compliance and ethical standards in claims management? Option A. Inform the senior engineer that their assessment was not considered during the initial settlement and close the file, as the settlement has already been finalized. Option B. Acknowledge the settlement was expedited to meet targets and proceed with closing the file, assuming the initial surveyor's report was sufficient for settlement purposes. Option C. Advise the insured that a potential error may have occurred and request they provide further documentation to justify a revised settlement, shifting the burden of proof entirely to the insured. Option D. Immediately initiate a review of the claim file, request clarification from the surveyor and the internal engineer, and if necessary, seek to reopen the settlement to ensure the claim was paid accurately and in accordance with the policy and regulatory requirements. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a review of the claim file, request clarification from the surveyor and the internal engineer, and if necessary, seek to reopen the settlement to ensure the claim was paid accurately and in accordance with the policy and regulatory requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to balance the immediate need to settle a claim with the long-term implications of potentially overlooking a critical detail that could impact the insurer's financial standing and adherence to regulatory requirements. The core of the challenge lies in the ethical obligation to act with integrity and diligence, even when faced with pressure or the desire for a swift resolution. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all aspects of the claim, particularly those related to hull and machinery, are thoroughly investigated and documented in accordance with established protocols and regulatory expectations. The correct approach involves a commitment to thorough investigation and documentation, even if it delays immediate settlement. This means meticulously reviewing the surveyor's report, cross-referencing it with policy terms and conditions, and ensuring all relevant evidence is gathered and assessed. The regulatory framework for claims management, particularly concerning hull and machinery, emphasizes the importance of accurate assessment of damage, causation, and adherence to policy provisions. By insisting on a complete review and potentially further investigation, the claims handler upholds the principles of good faith and fair dealing, ensuring that the settlement accurately reflects the loss and complies with all applicable laws and guidelines. This diligence protects the insurer from potential future disputes, regulatory scrutiny, and financial misstatements. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate settlement over thorough investigation fails to uphold the duty of care owed to the insured and the insurer. This could lead to an underpayment or overpayment of the claim, both of which have regulatory implications. Overpayment can result in financial losses for the insurer and potentially misrepresent the company's financial health. Underpayment can lead to disputes, regulatory complaints, and damage to the insurer's reputation. Another incorrect approach, such as accepting the surveyor's initial assessment without critical review, ignores the claims handler's responsibility to exercise independent judgment and ensure the accuracy of the information used to settle the claim. This can be seen as a failure to act with due diligence and could violate regulatory expectations regarding claims handling standards. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the inherent tension between efficiency and thoroughness. A structured decision-making process would involve 1. Identifying the core issue, a potential discrepancy or incompleteness in the claim assessment. 2. Consulting relevant policy terms and conditions and internal claims handling guidelines. 3. Evaluating the potential risks and benefits of different courses of action, considering both immediate and long-term consequences. 4. Seeking clarification or additional information from the surveyor or other relevant parties. 5. Documenting all decisions and the rationale behind them. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only expedient, but also ethically sound and compliant with regulatory requirements. Question 2. The control framework reveals a claims handler has identified several inconsistencies in a claimant's submission that raise a strong suspicion of deliberate misrepresentation to inflate the claim value. The handler has documented these inconsistencies thoroughly. What is the most appropriate next step in reporting this potentially fraudulent activity, adhering to best practices for claims management? Option A. Share the suspicions and documentation with colleagues in other departments to gather informal opinions before taking formal action. Option B. Proceed with settling the claim at a reduced amount to mitigate potential losses, without further investigation or reporting. Option C. Immediately escalate the concerns to the company's designated fraud investigation unit or supervisor, providing all documented evidence and observations. Option D. Directly contact the claimant's legal representative to inform them of the suspected fraud and request further documentation. The correct answer is C. Immediately escalate the concerns to the company's designated fraud investigation unit or supervisor, providing all documented evidence and observations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an associate in claims management to navigate the delicate balance between their duty to their employer, regulatory obligations, and ethical responsibilities when encountering potential fraudulent activity. The pressure to resolve claims efficiently and cost-effectively can sometimes create a conflict with the imperative to thoroughly investigate suspicious claims. A claims handler must exercise sound judgment, relying on established protocols and regulatory guidance to ensure that all actions are appropriate and defensible. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of escalating concerns, internally according to established company policy and regulatory requirements. This typically includes notifying a supervisor or designated fraud investigation unit, providing clear and concise details of the suspicious activity, and cooperating fully with any subsequent investigation. This approach is correct because it adheres to best practices for fraud detection and prevention, which are often mandated or strongly encouraged by regulatory bodies. Specifically, regulatory frameworks for claims management emphasize the importance of robust internal controls and the reporting of suspected fraud to prevent financial losses to insurers and policyholders, and to maintain the integrity of the insurance market. Ethical codes also dictate a duty of honesty and diligence, which includes taking appropriate steps when fraud is suspected. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity or to attempt to resolve the claim without further investigation, despite having reasonable grounds for suspicion. This failure to act violates the duty of care owed to the insurer and policyholders and can have significant financial and reputational consequences. It also contravenes regulatory expectations for proactive fraud management. Another incorrect approach would be to directly report the suspected fraud to external authorities without first following internal reporting procedures. While the intent might be to address the issue, this bypasses established internal controls and can create operational inefficiencies, potentially jeopardizing the investigation or leading to premature conclusions. It also fails to respect the employer's right to manage its own internal processes and investigations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's fraud prevention and reporting policies, as well as relevant regulatory guidelines. When suspicion arises, the claims handler should meticulously document all observations and evidence. The next step is to consult internal procedures for escalation, which typically involves informing a supervisor or a dedicated fraud unit. This ensures that the matter is handled by individuals with the appropriate expertise and authority, and that the investigation proceeds in a structured and compliant manner. Question 3. The control framework reveals that a policyholder has reported significant water damage to their property following a severe storm. The policyholder is distressed and believes the damage is clearly due to flooding. The claims handler needs to determine the extent of coverage. The policy contains a standard exclusion for flood damage. What is the most appropriate initial step for the claims handler to take in assessing this claim? Option A. State that all water damage is covered unless it is explicitly excluded by the policy, and then proceed to assess the damage. Option B. Immediately inform the policyholder that the damage is likely covered as it is water damage from a storm. Option C. Review the specific wording of the flood damage exclusion in the policy contract to determine if it applies to the reported damage. Option D. Advise the policyholder that the policy is unclear regarding storm-related water damage, and a decision will be made after further investigation. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the policyholder that the damage is likely covered as it is water damage from a storm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the insured's immediate need for clarity with the insurer's obligation to adhere strictly to the policy's contractual terms. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting policy coverage can lead to significant financial and reputational damage for the insurer, as well as potential legal action from the insured. The claims handler must exercise careful judgment to provide accurate information without making promises or interpretations that go beyond the explicit wording of the contract. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves carefully reviewing the specific wording of the flood damage exclusion in the policy contract. This approach is right because insurance policies are legally binding contracts, and their interpretation must be based on the precise language used. The claims handler's duty is to explain what the policy does and does not cover according to its terms. By focusing on the exclusion's wording, the handler ensures compliance with the contract and avoids making unauthorized representations about coverage. This aligns with the principle of utmost good faith and the regulatory requirement for claims handlers to act with honesty and fairness, providing accurate information based on the policy contract. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately assure the insured that the damage will be covered because it appears to be flood-related. This is incorrect because it bypasses the critical step of verifying coverage against the policy's specific terms, particularly exclusions. This could lead to a breach of contract if the exclusion, upon closer examination, applies. It also violates the ethical duty to be truthful and not to make representations that cannot be substantiated by the policy. Another incorrect approach is to tell the insured that the policy is unclear and that a decision will be made later without providing any immediate guidance on how the policy might apply. While acknowledging uncertainty is sometimes necessary, this approach fails to proactively assist the insured in understanding their policy. It can create unnecessary anxiety and delay, and it doesn't demonstrate a commitment to resolving the claim efficiently and transparently, which is a core expectation of claims management. A third incorrect approach is to state that all water damage is covered unless explicitly excluded. While this might be a general principle in some contexts, it is a dangerous oversimplification when specific exclusions, like flood damage, are present. The presence of an exclusion means that the general coverage for water damage is modified. Relying on a broad assumption without scrutinizing the specific exclusion is a failure to apply the contract accurately and can lead to misrepresentation of coverage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by prioritizing a thorough review of the policy contract. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the insured's reported loss. 2. Locating the relevant policy provisions, including coverage grants and exclusions. 3. Carefully analyzing the precise wording of any applicable exclusions. 4. Communicating the findings to the insured in a clear, factual, and policy-compliant manner, explaining what the policy does and does not cover based on its terms. If ambiguity remains after thorough review, the next step would be to consult with underwriting or legal counsel for interpretation, rather than making assumptions or premature declarations of coverage. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a complex property damage claim involves a fire of unknown origin. A forensic fire investigator has been engaged to determine the cause and origin. The investigator's report concludes that the fire was accidental, stemming from faulty electrical wiring, but also notes that the insured had recently increased their insurance coverage significantly. Which of the following actions by the claims handler best demonstrates adherence to regulatory and ethical standards in managing this expert opinion? Option A. Immediately accept the forensic investigator's conclusion of accidental cause and proceed with settlement based on the increased coverage, without further investigation into the timing of the coverage increase. Option B. Disregard the forensic investigator's report as potentially biased due to the mention of the coverage increase, and proceed with a settlement based solely on the initial assessment of the loss. Option C. Critically review the forensic investigator's report, assessing the methodology, evidence, and conclusions, and then independently evaluate the relevance of the coverage increase in conjunction with the expert's findings and policy terms. Option D. Forward the forensic investigator's report to the insured and ask them to confirm the findings, using their confirmation as the basis for settlement. The correct answer is A. Immediately accept the forensic investigator's conclusion of accidental cause and proceed with settlement based on the increased coverage, without further investigation into the timing of the coverage increase. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of claims involving specialized knowledge and the potential for conflicting expert opinions. The claims handler must navigate the technical intricacies of the forensic report, while remaining objective and adhering to regulatory requirements for claims investigation and settlement. The challenge lies in discerning the validity and relevance of the expert's findings, ensuring they are properly integrated into the claims assessment without undue influence or bias, and that all decisions are justifiable and compliant with the governing regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the forensic expert's report to understand its methodology, findings, and conclusions. This includes assessing the expert's qualifications, the scope of their investigation, and the evidence they relied upon. The claims handler must then critically evaluate how these findings impact the assessment of liability, quantum, and policy coverage. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of diligent investigation and fair claims handling, ensuring that all relevant evidence, including expert opinions, is considered objectively. Regulatory frameworks for claims management typically mandate that claims be investigated thoroughly and settled fairly, based on all available evidence. Relying on a qualified expert's opinion, when properly vetted and integrated, supports this mandate. Ethical considerations also require claims handlers to act with integrity and competence, which includes understanding and appropriately utilizing expert advice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to automatically accept the forensic expert's conclusions without independent scrutiny. This fails to uphold the claims handler's responsibility to conduct a diligent investigation, and can lead to an unfair settlement if the expert's findings are flawed, biased, or misinterpreted. It bypasses the critical evaluation necessary to ensure the report's accuracy and relevance, potentially violating regulatory requirements for objective claims assessment. Another incorrect approach is to disregard the forensic expert's report entirely because it presents findings that are inconvenient or contradict the initial assessment. This is a failure of due diligence and can lead to an incomplete or inaccurate claims settlement. Regulatory guidelines often require that all relevant evidence be considered, and ignoring a professional expert report, especially one obtained to clarify complex issues, is a breach of this duty. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a potential for bias. A third incorrect approach is to allow the forensic expert to dictate the claims settlement without the claims handler exercising their own professional judgment. While expert opinions are valuable, the ultimate responsibility for the claims decision rests with the claims handler. Over-reliance on the expert, to the exclusion of the handler's own assessment of policy terms, liability, and other relevant factors, can lead to an inappropriate settlement and regulatory noncompliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach expert reports by first understanding the expert's role and the scope of their engagement. They should then critically evaluate the report's content, methodology, and conclusions against the available evidence and policy terms. This involves questioning assumptions, verifying data, and considering alternative interpretations. The claims handler must then integrate the expert's findings into their overall claims assessment, exercising their professional judgment to arrive at a fair and compliant settlement. This process ensures that expert advice is utilized effectively, while maintaining the handler's accountability and adherence to regulatory and ethical standards. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that a claims handler is responsible for a significant piece of physical evidence recovered from a fire scene. The handler's immediate actions are to clean the item to make it easier to handle and then place it in a general office supply cabinet. Which approach best aligns with the principles of evidence management and regulatory expectations for claims handling? Option A. Clean the evidence thoroughly to remove any contaminants and then store it in a readily accessible location for easy retrieval. Option B. Place the evidence in a standard filing cabinet with a handwritten note describing its origin. Option C. Immediately dispose of the evidence after a brief visual inspection, as it is unlikely to be of further value. Option D. Photograph the evidence in its original location, clearly label it with a unique identifier, and store it in a secure, climate-controlled evidence locker with a documented chain of custody. Correct answer is D. Photograph the evidence in its original location, clearly label it with a unique identifier, and store it in a secure, climate-controlled evidence locker with a documented chain of custody. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the immediate need for efficient claims processing with the long-term imperative of maintaining the integrity and admissibility of physical evidence. The risk of evidence degradation or contamination, coupled with the potential for disputes over its authenticity or chain of custody, necessitates a meticulous and well-documented approach. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the actions taken preserve the evidence's value for investigation, subrogation, or potential litigation, while also adhering to established protocols. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the physical evidence by photographing it in situ before any disturbance, clearly labeling it with unique identifiers, and securely storing it in a controlled environment. This approach is right because it directly aligns with the principles of evidence preservation and chain of custody, which are fundamental to claims management and are implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory frameworks governing claims handling and evidence admissibility. Proper documentation ensures that the evidence's condition at the time of discovery is accurately recorded, minimizing disputes about its state and preventing claims of tampering. Secure storage and clear labeling are essential for maintaining the chain of custody, proving that the evidence has been continuously accounted for from collection to presentation, a critical requirement in legal and regulatory contexts. An incorrect approach that involves immediately cleaning and storing the physical evidence without initial photographic documentation fails, because it destroys the original context and condition of the evidence. This action can render the evidence inadmissible in legal proceedings and undermines its investigative value, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny for failing to properly manage and preserve critical assets. Another incorrect approach, which is to simply place the physical evidence in a general storage area without specific labeling or environmental controls, is professionally unacceptable. This method risks contamination, loss, or degradation of the evidence, compromising its integrity and the chain of custody. Such a failure could result in regulatory penalties for inadequate claims handling practices and could jeopardize the insurer's ability to pursue subrogation or defend against claims. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk assessment of the physical evidence's potential importance. This includes considering its relevance to the claim's cause, extent of damage, potential for fraud, and future use in legal or subrogation actions. Following this assessment, the handler should consult internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines for evidence handling. If the evidence is potentially significant, a protocol involving in situ documentation, photography, videography, detailed descriptive notes, secure collection, proper labeling with a unique identifier, and controlled storage with a documented chain of custody should be implemented. This systematic approach ensures that evidence is managed professionally, ethically, and in compliance with all applicable standards. Question 6. What factors determine the most appropriate strategy for managing an insured's defense in a complex liability lawsuit, considering the insurer's duty to defend and the potential for significant financial exposure within the context of U.S. state insurance regulations and common law principles? Option A. A comprehensive evaluation of the insured's potential liability, the claimant's evidence and legal arguments, the policy's coverage provisions, and the estimated costs and risks associated with various defense and settlement strategies. Option B. A decision to delegate all defense decisions to the insured's personal legal counsel without active oversight or input from the insurer's claims department. Option C. A strategy that prioritizes the insurer's financial recovery by aggressively pursuing subrogation opportunities before fully assessing the insured's defense needs. Option D. A primary focus on minimizing immediate defense expenditures by seeking the quickest possible settlement, regardless of the thoroughness of the investigation or the strength of the claimant's case. The correct answer is A. A comprehensive evaluation of the insured's potential liability, the claimant's evidence and legal arguments, the policy's coverage provisions, and the estimated costs and risks associated with various defense and settlement strategies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims professional to navigate the complexities of the litigation process while adhering strictly to the associated claims management (AIC) regulatory framework, which is assumed to be based on U.S. state insurance regulations and common law principles governing claims handling and litigation. The core challenge lies in balancing the insurer's duty to defend with the need for efficient and cost-effective resolution, all within the bounds of legal and ethical obligations. Careful judgment is required to assess when litigation is unavoidable, how to manage the process effectively, and what information is critical for decision-making. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the insured's potential liability, the strength of the claimant's case, and the potential exposure to the insurer. This includes a comprehensive investigation, a realistic assessment of damages, and consideration of available defenses. The regulatory justification for this approach stems from the insurer's duty of good faith and fair dealing, which mandates that insurers act reasonably and prudently in handling claims and defending their insureds. State insurance regulations often outline specific requirements for claims investigation, settlement negotiations, and the defense of lawsuits, emphasizing timely and thorough action. Ethically, this approach aligns with the principle of acting in the best interest of both the insured and the insurer, seeking a just and equitable outcome. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on minimizing immediate defense costs without a thorough assessment of liability and exposure is professionally unacceptable. This failure violates the duty of good faith and fair dealing by potentially exposing the insured to an unfavorable judgment due to inadequate defense. Regulatory failures would include non-compliance with state statutes requiring reasonable investigation and defense efforts. Ethically, it represents a breach of trust and fiduciary duty. Another incorrect approach that involves prematurely settling a claim without adequate investigation or legal analysis, simply to avoid the perceived burden of litigation, is also professionally unsound. This can lead to overpayment of claims and may not be in the best interest of the insurer in the long run. Regulatory failures could include violating internal claims handling guidelines or state regulations that require a reasoned basis for settlement amounts. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes the insurer's financial interests above all else, potentially pressuring the insured into a disadvantageous settlement or defense strategy, is a significant ethical and regulatory breach. This disregards the insurer's obligation to defend the insured and can lead to claims of bad faith. Regulatory failures would include violations of Unfair Claims Settlement Practices Acts. Ethically, it is a clear conflict of interest and a failure to uphold the insurer's responsibilities. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the claim's merits, a clear understanding of the applicable legal standards and policy provisions, and a proactive strategy for managing the claim through its life cycle. This includes regular communication with the insured and legal counsel, continuous reassessment of the case's trajectory, and informed decision-making regarding settlement or trial. Question 7. Examination of the data shows that a policyholder has submitted a claim following a minor property damage incident. The policyholder is experiencing significant personal distress and is eager to receive a settlement as quickly as possible, urging the claims handler to accept their initial estimate of the damage and issue payment immediately. The claims handler has a duty to act in good faith and handle the claim efficiently, but also must ensure that the settlement is fair and based on a complete understanding of the loss. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler to ensure legal and regulatory compliance? Option A. Inform the policyholder that the claim will be processed, but delay the settlement offer indefinitely while requesting additional, non-essential information. Option B. Rely solely on the policyholder's initial statement and estimate of the damage without seeking independent verification. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the extent of the damage and the validity of the claim, gathering all necessary documentation and evidence before making a settlement offer. Option D. Immediately accept the policyholder's initial settlement demand to alleviate their distress and expedite the process. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the extent of the damage and the validity of the claim, gathering all necessary documentation and evidence before making a settlement offer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a quick settlement and the insurer's obligation to adhere to regulatory requirements for claims handling. The claims handler must exercise careful judgment to balance these competing interests while ensuring full compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation of the claim, including obtaining all necessary documentation and verifying the information provided before making a settlement offer. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on fair and equitable claims handling, which necessitates a complete understanding of the claim's validity and extent. Specifically, this approach upholds the principles of due diligence and good faith, ensuring that the settlement is based on accurate information and is not premature. It also respects the policyholder's right to a fair assessment of their claim. An incorrect approach of immediately agreeing to the client's settlement demand without proper investigation would be a failure to comply with regulatory obligations. This could lead to an underpayment of a valid claim or an overpayment of a fraudulent one, both of which are detrimental to the insurer and potentially the policyholder. Such an action would violate the duty of care owed to the policyholder and the insurer, and could be construed as acting without due diligence. Another incorrect approach, that of delaying the settlement offer indefinitely while continuing to request minor, non-essential information, would also be a regulatory failure. This could be seen as a breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and potentially violate regulations regarding prompt claims handling and communication. It could also lead to reputational damage for the insurer. A further incorrect approach, that of solely relying on the client's initial statement without seeking independent verification or corroborating evidence, would demonstrate a lack of due diligence. This could result in an inaccurate assessment of the claim, leading to either an unfair settlement or an unnecessary denial, both of which are regulatory concerns. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, understanding the policy terms and conditions. Second, conducting a comprehensive investigation to gather all relevant facts and evidence. Third, assessing the claim's validity and quantum based on the gathered information and policy provisions. And fourth, communicating clearly and promptly with the policyholder regarding the claim's progress and the basis for any settlement offer or denial, all while adhering strictly to the applicable regulatory framework. Question 8. When evaluating a complex commercial property damage claim involving a novel cause of loss, what is the most appropriate approach for a claims professional to determine coverage under a commercial property policy? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of all relevant policy provisions, gather all available facts and evidence, objectively analyze how the facts align with the policy language, and consult legal counsel for interpretation of any ambiguities. Option B. Make a coverage determination based on the insured's initial description of the loss and common industry practices for similar types of events. Option C. Advise the insured that coverage cannot be determined until all possible future developments related to the loss have been fully investigated, even if it takes an extended period. Option D. Apply the policy's exclusions broadly to limit the insurer's exposure, assuming the loss is likely not covered unless explicitly proven otherwise by the insured. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of all relevant policy provisions, gather all available facts and evidence, objectively analyze how the facts align with the policy language, and consult legal counsel for interpretation of any ambiguities. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims professional to navigate the complexities of coverage analysis in a situation where the policy language is ambiguous and the facts of the loss are still developing. The claims professional must balance the insurer's obligation to provide coverage under the policy with the need to avoid paying for claims that are not covered. This requires a thorough understanding of the policy terms, relevant case law, and regulatory requirements. The claims professional must also manage stakeholder expectations, including those of the insured and potentially legal counsel. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process of coverage analysis. This begins with a thorough review of all relevant policy provisions, including insuring agreements, exclusions, conditions, and definitions. It then requires an objective assessment of the facts of the loss and how they relate to the policy language. Where ambiguity exists, the claims professional should consider the doctrine of contra profundum, which generally construes ambiguous policy language against the insurer. However, this must be balanced with the insurer's right to enforce clear and unambiguous policy terms. The claims professional should also consult with legal counsel when necessary to interpret complex legal issues or policy provisions. This methodical approach ensures that coverage decisions are fair, consistent, and compliant with regulatory obligations, such as those requiring prompt and fair claims handling. An incorrect approach would be to make a coverage decision based solely on the initial, potentially incomplete, information provided by the insured, without a comprehensive review of the policy and the facts. This fails to uphold the duty of good faith and fair dealing, as it may lead to an unwarranted denial of coverage or an assumption of liability for a non-covered loss. Another incorrect approach is to delay the coverage analysis indefinitely, waiting for all possible facts to emerge, which would violate regulatory requirements for prompt claims handling and could prejudice the insured's ability to mitigate their loss. Furthermore, relying on anecdotal experience or industry custom rather than specific policy language and applicable law is a failure to adhere to the contractual obligations and regulatory standards governing claims handling. Professionals should approach coverage analysis by first identifying all potentially applicable policy provisions. They should then gather all relevant facts and evidence pertaining to the loss. Next, they must objectively analyze how the facts align with the policy language, paying close attention to any ambiguities. If ambiguities are found, they should be interpreted in accordance with established legal principles and regulatory guidance. Throughout this process, all steps and reasoning should be meticulously documented in the claim file. When in doubt, seeking guidance from legal counsel or a more experienced colleague is a critical part of sound professional decision-making. Question 9. Stakeholder feedback indicates a claims professional is handling a claim for a policyholder who is also a close personal friend, with whom they have a significant ongoing social relationship. The claims professional is aware of this relationship and its potential to influence their judgment. What is the most ethically sound and regulatorily compliant approach to manage this situation according to the Associate in Claims Management (AIC) framework? Option A. Seek advice from the close personal friend on how to best handle their claim to ensure they receive a fair outcome. Option B. Delay the claim decision until after the personal relationship has naturally concluded or significantly diminished. Option C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and recuse themselves from all aspects of the claim's investigation and decision-making process, allowing another claims professional to handle the file. Option D. Proceed with the claim decision as usual, ensuring the decision is fair and objective, as the personal relationship should not impact professional duties. The correct answer is C. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and recuse themselves from all aspects of the claim's investigation and decision-making process, allowing another claims professional to handle the file. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims professional to balance the immediate need to resolve a claim with the imperative to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The pressure to close files quickly can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are not only efficient, but also fair, transparent, and in accordance with the Associate in Claims Management (AIC) regulatory framework. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and addressing potential conflicts of interest before they can influence claim decisions. This demonstrates a commitment to integrity and adherence to the principles of fair dealing expected of claims professionals. Specifically, it aligns with the AICM's emphasis on maintaining professional conduct and avoiding situations that could compromise objectivity. By disclosing the relationship and recusing oneself from the decision-making process, the claims professional upholds the trust placed in them by policyholders, insurers, and the regulatory bodies. This proactive disclosure and recusal are fundamental to preventing even the appearance of impropriety, which is a cornerstone of ethical claims management. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the claim decision without disclosure fails to recognize the inherent conflict of interest. This action violates the ethical obligation to act impartially and can lead to accusations of favoritism or bias, undermining the integrity of the claims process. It also contravenes regulatory expectations that claims professionals will manage their professional responsibilities with objectivity. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying the decision until after the personal relationship has ended, is also problematic. While it attempts to mitigate the conflict, it creates an unnecessary delay in claim resolution, potentially causing hardship to the claimant. Furthermore, it does not address the ethical lapse of having allowed the conflict to arise in the first place without immediate disclosure and management. This approach suggests a reactive rather than proactive stance on ethical conduct. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves seeking advice from the involved party on how to proceed with the claim is a severe ethical breach. This directly involves the conflicted party in the decision-making process, exacerbating the conflict of interest and demonstrating a profound lack of professional judgment and integrity. It not only violates ethical principles, but also likely contravenes specific regulatory prohibitions against such actions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Identify potential conflicts of interest. Recognize any personal, financial, or professional relationships that could influence objective decision-making. 2. Consult relevant ethical guidelines and regulations. Refer to the AICM Code of Conduct and any applicable jurisdictional laws. 3. Disclose the conflict. Immediately inform supervisors and relevant parties about the potential conflict. 4. Recuse from decision-making. Step away from any part of the process where the conflict could exert influence. 5. Seek guidance. Obtain direction from appropriate authorities or supervisors on how to proceed ethically and compliantly. 6. Document all actions. Maintain a clear record of the conflict, disclosure, and the steps taken to manage it. Question 10. Market research demonstrates that claims professionals often face situations where a third party's actions cause damage to an insured's property, leading to a claim. In such scenarios, after the insurer has indemnified the insured, the insurer may seek to recover the paid amount from the responsible third party. Considering the regulatory framework governing claims management in the United States, which of the following actions best exemplifies the proper application of subrogation principles? Option A. The insurer decides not to pursue subrogation because the potential recovery amount is relatively small, even though the insured has been fully indemnified and a clear responsible third party exists. Option B. The insurer negotiates a settlement with the third party that includes a recovery for the insurer, but also waives any potential claims the insured might have against that third party for damages not covered by the insurance policy. Option C. The insurer investigates the third party's liability, and upon confirming the insured has been fully indemnified for their covered loss, pursues recovery from the responsible third party in accordance with applicable state laws and policy provisions, ensuring the insured's rights are not prejudiced. Option D. The insurer immediately files a lawsuit against the third party for the full amount of the insured's loss, without confirming the extent of the insured's indemnification, or considering the insured's potential uninsured losses. The correct answer is D. The insurer immediately files a lawsuit against the third party for the full amount of the insured's loss, without confirming the extent of the insured's indemnification, or considering the insured's potential uninsured losses. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims professional to navigate the delicate balance between recovering losses for their insurer and respecting the rights of the insured and third parties. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the limitations and requirements of subrogation under the applicable regulatory framework, ensuring that the pursuit of recovery does not infringe upon the insured's ability to be made whole or create undue hardship. Careful judgment is required to identify valid subrogation opportunities while adhering to legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the subrogation clause within the insurance policy and the relevant statutory provisions governing subrogation in the specified jurisdiction. This includes identifying a clear right of subrogation, ensuring the insured has been indemnified for their loss, and pursuing recovery from the responsible third party in a manner that is both legally sound and ethically responsible. Specifically, it requires verifying that the insured's loss has been fully compensated before initiating subrogation efforts, as subrogation is a derivative right that arises only after the insurer has paid the insured. Furthermore, it necessitates adherence to any jurisdictional rules regarding notice to the insured and the responsible party, and ensuring that the subrogation action does not prejudice the insured's own potential claims. An incorrect approach would be to immediately pursue subrogation against a third party, without first confirming that the insured has been fully indemnified for their loss. This violates the fundamental principle that subrogation is a remedy for the insurer to recover what it has paid out, not to gain an advantage beyond the insured's actual loss. Another incorrect approach would be to pursue subrogation in a manner that compromises the insured's ability to recover any uninsured losses or to settle their own claims against the third party. This could involve filing suit in a way that creates a conflict of interest, or failing to adequately communicate with the insured about the subrogation process and its potential impact on their own recovery. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore or misinterpret specific statutory requirements for subrogation, such as notice periods or limitations on the amount recoverable, leading to legal challenges and potential penalties. Professional decision-making in similar situations requires a systematic process. First, the claims professional must thoroughly review the insurance policy for subrogation clauses and understand their scope. Second, they must identify the responsible third party and assess the potential for recovery. Third, and critically, they must verify the extent of the insured's indemnification. Fourth, they must research and apply the specific subrogation laws and regulations of the relevant jurisdiction. Finally, they must communicate transparently with the insured throughout the process, ensuring their rights are protected and their cooperation is sought appropriately. Question 11. Regulatory review indicates that a claimant, MS, Anya Sharma, has lodged a formal complaint regarding the handling of her recent property damage claim. MS. Sharma expresses significant dissatisfaction with the perceived lack of communication and the slow pace of the investigation, stating she feels ignored and that her financial situation is worsening due to the delay. She has made multiple attempts to contact her assigned claims handler, Mr. David Chen, with limited success. Mr. Chen has provided minimal updates and has not offered a clear timeline for the claim's resolution. Which of the following actions by Mr. Chen, in response to MS. Sharma's complaint, best aligns with regulatory expectations for managing complaints and resolving conflicts in the claims management process? Option A. Inform MS. Sharma that her complaint is noted but that the investigation will proceed at its own pace, as per policy terms, and that further communication will only occur when a final decision is reached. Option B. Immediately offer MS. Sharma a nominal settlement amount to expedite the closure of her file, without a full assessment of the damage, to resolve her complaint quickly. Option C. Advise MS. Sharma that her frustration is understandable, but that the insurer is not obligated to provide frequent updates, and that she should wait for the investigation to conclude before expecting further information. Option D. Acknowledge MS. Sharma's complaint, apologize for the communication breakdown, provide a clear explanation of the remaining investigation steps and a realistic estimated timeline for a decision, and confirm the next point of contact and when she can expect an update. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge MS. Sharma's complaint, apologize for the communication breakdown, provide a clear explanation of the remaining investigation steps and a realistic estimated timeline for a decision, and confirm the next point of contact and when she can expect an update. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the claimant's right to a fair and timely resolution with the insurer's obligation to investigate thoroughly and adhere to policy terms. The claims handler must navigate potential emotional distress from the claimant, the need for objective evidence, and the regulatory imperative to manage complaints effectively and ethically. Careful judgment is required to ensure the claimant feels heard and respected, while upholding the integrity of the claims process. The correct approach involves acknowledging the claimant's frustration, clearly explaining the next steps in the investigation, and providing a realistic timeframe for resolution, while also adhering to the insurer's internal complaint handling procedures and relevant regulatory guidelines for customer service and dispute resolution. This demonstrates empathy, transparency, and a commitment to a fair process, which aligns with regulatory expectations for good faith claims handling and customer care. An incorrect approach that involves dismissing the claimant's concerns and immediately denying the claim without a thorough investigation fails to meet regulatory requirements for due diligence and fair treatment of policyholders. This could be seen as a breach of good faith and could lead to regulatory sanctions for unfair claims settlement practices. Another incorrect approach, which is to offer a settlement that is significantly below the likely value of the claim simply to appease the claimant and close the file quickly, is unethical and potentially illegal. This constitutes an attempt to exploit the claimant's situation and violates the principle of fair compensation as outlined in insurance regulations. A further incorrect approach, which is to ignore the claimant's repeated attempts to contact the insurer and delay the investigation indefinitely, is a direct violation of regulatory requirements for timely claims handling and complaint resolution. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and can result in significant penalties for the insurer. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the claimant's perspective, gathering all necessary information objectively, applying policy terms and relevant regulations consistently, and communicating clearly and empathetically throughout the claims process. This includes having established procedures for complaint escalation and resolution that are compliant with regulatory standards. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that a significant portion of disability claims are approved based on the initial medical reports submitted by claimants' treating physicians, leading to higher than anticipated payout ratios. As a claims manager, you are tasked with implementing strategies to improve efficiency and reduce claim duration. Proposed strategies suggest automatically approving claims where the treating physician's report indicates a specific level of impairment, without requiring further independent medical review unless flagged by a specific risk algorithm. How should you proceed? Option A. Implement the proposed strategy to streamline the claims process and reduce processing times, as suggested by the efficiency study. Option B. Implement the proposed strategy, but only for claims where the claimant's treating physician has a long-standing relationship with the insurer to leverage existing knowledge. Option C. Implement the proposed strategy but ensure the risk algorithm is highly sensitive to identify potential fraudulent claims, thereby balancing efficiency with risk mitigation. Option D. Reject the proposed strategy and advocate for a more robust review process that includes independent medical examinations for a significant percentage of claims, regardless of the initial report. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed strategy to streamline the claims process and reduce processing times, as suggested by the efficiency study. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the insurer's need for efficient claims processing with the claimant's right to a fair and thorough assessment of their disability. The claims manager must navigate potential biases, ensure adherence to regulatory standards for disability evaluation, and maintain ethical conduct throughout the process. The core of the challenge lies in recognizing that efficiency should not come at the expense of accuracy or fairness, particularly when dealing with potentially vulnerable individuals. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted medical evidence, including the claimant's own physician's reports, and potentially requesting further independent medical examinations if the existing information is insufficient or contradictory. This approach prioritizes the claimant's well-being and ensures that the disability determination is based on objective medical facts and established criteria, aligning with the principles of good faith and fair dealing expected in insurance claims management. It upholds the regulatory requirement to conduct a thorough investigation and make a determination based on the totality of the evidence. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the initial medical report from the claimant's treating physician without further verification, especially if there are indicators of potential overstatement or if the report lacks specific details required for a disability assessment. This could lead to an inaccurate assessment and potentially deny a legitimate claim, violating the insurer's duty to investigate thoroughly. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite the claim based on a perceived pattern of high claim payouts in similar cases, as this introduces a bias and prioritizes cost containment over individual claim merit, which is ethically unsound and likely violates regulatory guidelines against discriminatory practices. Finally, prematurely closing the claim based on the efficiency study's suggestion to streamline processes without a complete and accurate assessment of the claimant's functional limitations would be a direct contravention of the duty to investigate and adjudicate claims fairly. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core ethical and regulatory obligations. This involves understanding the specific requirements for disability assessments within the relevant jurisdiction, which typically mandate a thorough and impartial investigation. The decision-making process should then involve evaluating the available evidence against these requirements, identifying any gaps or inconsistencies, and determining the most appropriate next steps to ensure a fair and accurate outcome. This often means resisting pressure for expediency when it compromises due diligence and prioritizing the integrity of the claims assessment process. Question 13. The performance metrics show that the average claims handling time has increased by 15% in the last quarter, prompting management to emphasize faster file closure. A claimant has reported a minor property damage incident. The claimant has provided a brief description of the damage and stated they have obtained a quote from a local repair shop. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for timely claims resolution with the requirement for thorough information gathering? Option A. Acknowledge receipt of the claimant's information and inform them that a decision will be made based on the provided details within the next 48 hours. Option B. Contact the repair shop directly to verify the quote and request photographs of the damage before making any assessment. Option C. Accept the claimant's description of damage and the repair shop's quote without further investigation to expedite closure. Option D. Request a detailed inventory of all damaged items from the claimant and obtain at least 2 independent repair estimates before proceeding. Correct answer is C. Accept the claimant's description of damage and the repair shop's quote without further investigation to expedite closure. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims handler to balance the need for efficient claims processing with the fundamental duty to gather all necessary information to make a fair and accurate assessment. The pressure to meet performance metrics can lead to shortcuts that compromise thoroughness, potentially resulting in underpayments or overpayments, and ultimately damaging the insurer's reputation and customer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of efficiency does not override the obligation to conduct a comprehensive investigation. The correct approach involves proactively seeking all relevant information from multiple sources, including the claimant, third parties, and any available documentation, even if it requires additional time. This aligns with the core principles of claims management, which mandate a thorough and impartial investigation to determine liability and quantum. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing fair claims practices, emphasize the insurer's responsibility to investigate claims promptly and thoroughly. Ethical considerations also dictate that claimants should not be disadvantaged by the insurer's internal performance pressures. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the claimant's initial statement without seeking corroborating evidence fails to meet the standard of a reasonable investigation. This can lead to an incomplete understanding of the loss and potentially an incorrect settlement. It violates the principle of due diligence and may contravene regulations requiring insurers to act in good faith. Another incorrect approach that involves making a settlement offer based on assumptions or incomplete information, driven by the desire to close the file quickly, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for the accuracy of the claim assessment and can result in financial detriment to either the insurer or the claimant. Such actions can be considered unfair claims settlement practices, leading to regulatory sanctions. A further incorrect approach that involves dismissing potentially relevant information because it was not provided by the claimant initially, without independent verification or further inquiry, is also flawed. This approach limits the scope of the investigation and may overlook critical details that could impact the claim's outcome. It fails to uphold the insurer's duty to investigate all aspects of a claim fairly. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, identify the core information required for the specific claim type. Second, determine the most reliable sources for this information. Third, actively pursue these sources, documenting all efforts. Fourth, critically evaluate the gathered information for completeness and consistency. Finally, make a decision based on the totality of the evidence, prioritizing accuracy and fairness over speed, while remaining mindful of regulatory obligations and ethical standards. Question 14. Process analysis reveals a claims handler is managing a complex property damage claim where the claimant, facing significant financial hardship, is eager for a swift settlement and has presented an initial demand that appears inflated. The handler has access to preliminary repair estimates that suggest a lower valuation. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach for the claims handler to adopt? Option A. Delay the investigation and settlement process to gather more leverage, hoping the claimant will reduce their demand due to prolonged waiting. Option B. Immediately accept the claimant's initial demand to expedite the settlement and alleviate the claimant's hardship, as this demonstrates good customer service. Option C. Present only the repair estimates that support the claimant's initial demand to facilitate a quicker resolution, while withholding other potentially contradictory information. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation, obtain independent assessments if necessary, and communicate transparently with the claimant regarding the process and findings, aiming for a fair settlement based on policy terms and evidence. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation, obtain independent assessments if necessary, and communicate transparently with the claimant regarding the process and findings, aiming for a fair settlement based on policy terms and evidence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a claimant's desire for a quick settlement and the insurer's obligation to ensure fair and accurate claim resolution. The claims handler must navigate this tension while upholding ethical duties and regulatory compliance. The pressure for expediency can tempt a handler to overlook crucial details or accept an inflated settlement, potentially leading to financial detriment for the insurer and a breach of fiduciary responsibility. Conversely, an overly protracted process can frustrate the claimant and lead to accusations of bad faith. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation of the claim, adhering strictly to policy terms and applicable regulations. This means gathering all necessary documentation, obtaining expert opinions where warranted, and communicating transparently with the claimant about the process and findings. The regulatory framework for claims management emphasizes fairness, good faith, and the accurate assessment of damages. This approach ensures that the settlement, when reached, is justifiable, compliant with policy provisions, and aligns with the insurer's duty to its policyholders and stakeholders. An incorrect approach of immediately agreeing to the claimant's initial demand without independent verification fails to meet the duty of care and good faith. This bypasses the investigative process, potentially leading to an overpayment and a violation of the principle of accurate loss assessment. Another incorrect approach of delaying the process unnecessarily without valid justification, while perhaps intended to pressure the claimant, can be construed as bad faith. This can lead to regulatory penalties and damage the insurer's reputation. A third incorrect approach of selectively presenting information to the claimant that favors a quick settlement, while omitting details that might lead to a lower, more accurate valuation, constitutes a breach of transparency and good faith obligations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective fact-finding, adherence to policy terms, and compliance with all relevant regulations. This involves a structured investigation, clear documentation of all steps and decisions, and consistent, fair communication with all parties involved. When faced with conflicting pressures, the professional should always default to the established ethical and regulatory standards governing claims handling. Question 15. Research into the effectiveness of bias mitigation strategies in claims handling reveals that a claims handler is reviewing a series of claims. One claimant is an elderly individual who speaks with a slight accent, and another is a young professional who is very articulate. The handler has a significant backlog of claims to process, which approach best upholds the principle of treating all claimants fairly. Option A. Prioritizing the claims from the articulate young professional due to the perceived ease of communication and faster resolution, while expediting the review of the elderly claimant's file with less detailed scrutiny. Option B. Making assumptions about the complexity of the elderly claimant's needs based on their age and accent, and offering a settlement that is quicker but potentially less than what is objectively warranted, while focusing more resources on the young professional's claim. Option C. Applying the same objective assessment criteria and communication protocols to both claimants, regardless of their background or communication style, ensuring all policy provisions and evidence are thoroughly reviewed. Option D. Delegating the review of the elderly claimant's claim to a junior team member with less experience, assuming it will be a straightforward case, and dedicating more time to the young professional's claim which appears more complex. The correct answer is C. Applying the same objective assessment criteria and communication protocols to both claimants, regardless of their background or communication style, ensuring all policy provisions and evidence are thoroughly reviewed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to balance the need for efficient claims processing with the fundamental ethical and regulatory obligation to treat all claimants fairly. The pressure to manage caseloads and meet performance metrics can inadvertently lead to biases or shortcuts that compromise fair treatment. Careful judgment is crucial to ensure that individual circumstances are considered without prejudice, and that all claimants receive a consistent and equitable claims experience. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating potential biases in the claims handling process. This means implementing standardized procedures for evaluating claims, ensuring clear communication with all parties, and providing consistent explanations for decisions. This approach aligns with the core principles of fair treatment, which are often enshrined in regulatory frameworks and ethical codes governing the insurance industry. Specifically, regulatory guidelines typically mandate that insurers act with integrity and treat customers fairly, which includes avoiding discrimination and ensuring that claims are assessed impartially based on the policy terms and evidence presented. An incorrect approach that relies on assumptions based on claimant demographics or prior interactions would fail to treat all claimants fairly. This is because it introduces subjective bias, potentially leading to differential treatment that is not based on the merits of the claim. Such an approach could violate regulatory requirements for impartiality and could lead to accusations of discrimination. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, leading to rushed assessments and potentially overlooking crucial details or claimant circumstances, also fails to treat all claimants fairly. This can result in incorrect claim valuations or denials, causing financial hardship and eroding trust. Regulatory bodies often expect claims to be investigated and assessed with due diligence, ensuring that all relevant information is considered. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to impartiality and a thorough understanding of the policy terms and applicable regulations. Claims handlers should be trained to recognize and challenge their own biases and to follow established procedures that promote fairness. When faced with complex or sensitive claims, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel can help ensure that decisions are made ethically and in compliance with all requirements. The focus should always be on the individual claim and the claimant's rights, rather than on generalizations or expediency. Question 16. To address the challenge of ensuring fair claim adjudication and avoiding discriminatory practices, a claims adjuster is reviewing a policyholder's claim for property damage. The policyholder belongs to a demographic group that has historically faced socioeconomic challenges. The adjuster has access to the policy terms, photographic evidence of the damage, and repair estimates. Which of the following approaches best upholds the principles of non-discrimination and ethical claims management? Option A. Compare the claim to similar claims filed by policyholders from more affluent demographic groups and offer a settlement that is significantly less than what would be offered to those groups, arguing that the claimant's background suggests a different standard of recovery. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the policy provisions and the submitted evidence to determine coverage and the appropriate benefit amount, ensuring the assessment is solely based on the policy's terms and the factual circumstances of the damage, irrespective of the policyholder's demographic background. Option C. Initiate a prolonged investigation and request additional, non-essential documentation from the policyholder, citing a need for increased scrutiny due to the policyholder's demographic profile to ensure the claim is legitimate. Option D. Base the assessment of the claim on assumptions about the policyholder's potential need for financial assistance, offering a settlement that is lower than market value to provide immediate relief, even if it means not fully adhering to the policy's coverage limits. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the policy provisions and the submitted evidence to determine coverage and the appropriate benefit amount, ensuring the assessment is solely based on the policy's terms and the factual circumstances of the damage, irrespective of the policyholder's demographic background. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because claims adjusters are tasked with fairly and impartially evaluating claims, which inherently requires them to avoid any form of discrimination. The AICM designation emphasizes ethical conduct and adherence to regulatory frameworks designed to protect policyholders. Misinterpreting or misapplying policies based on protected characteristics can lead to unfair claim outcomes, regulatory penalties, and damage to the insurer's reputation. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all claim decisions are based solely on the policy terms, factual evidence, and applicable laws, without any influence from personal biases or assumptions related to protected classes. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the policy language and the specific facts of the claim, ensuring that the assessment of coverage and benefits is applied consistently and without regard to the claimant's protected characteristics. This aligns with the fundamental principles of insurance law and ethical claims handling, which mandate equal treatment for all policyholders. Specifically, regulatory frameworks in the U.S., such as the Unruh Civil Rights Act in California and similar anti-discrimination statutes at the federal and state levels, prohibit discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, sex, age, disability, and other protected classes. Insurers have a legal and ethical obligation to process claims without prejudice. An incorrect approach that relies on assumptions about the claimant's lifestyle or perceived financial need based on their background is a direct violation of anti-discrimination laws and ethical standards. Such assumptions are not based on policy terms or factual evidence and introduce bias into the claims process. This can lead to a denial of benefits or an underpayment of a valid claim, constituting unfair claim settlement practices. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying the claim investigation or requesting excessive documentation solely because the claimant belongs to a particular demographic group is also discriminatory. This tactic can be used to frustrate the claimant and potentially lead them to abandon their claim, which is unethical and illegal. Finally, an approach that offers a settlement amount that is disproportionately lower than what would be offered to a claimant with a similar claim, but from a different demographic group, is a clear instance of discriminatory pricing or settlement, violating the principle of equal treatment under the policy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to objective evaluation. Claims adjusters should first identify the relevant policy provisions and factual evidence. They must then assess how these apply to the claim, consciously setting aside any personal biases or assumptions about the claimant's protected characteristics. If there is any uncertainty about whether a decision might be perceived as discriminatory, the adjuster should consult with supervisors or legal counsel to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and ethical guidelines. The focus must always remain on the contractual obligations of the policy and the objective facts of the loss. Question 17. Analysis of the primary functions of a claims department within the Associated Claims Management (AIC) framework, considering its obligations to both the insurer and the policyholder, which approach best defines its role. Option A. To act solely as a customer service arm of the insurer, focusing on policyholder retention through generous settlements, regardless of the claim's validity or policy coverage. Option B. To minimize claim payouts by aggressively seeking reasons to deny coverage, thereby protecting the insurer's profitability above all other considerations. Option C. To expedite claim settlements by approving all requests that appear reasonable on the surface, prioritizing customer satisfaction over strict adherence to policy terms and investigative diligence. Option D. To investigate, evaluate, and settle claims in accordance with policy provisions and applicable laws, acting as a steward of the insurer's resources while upholding the insurer's contractual promises to the policyholder. The correct answer is D. To investigate, evaluate, and settle claims in accordance with policy provisions and applicable laws, acting as a steward of the insurer's resources while upholding the insurer's contractual promises to the policyholder. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a claims professional to balance the insurer's financial interests with the policyholder's contractual rights and expectations, all within the strict confines of the Associated Claims Management (AIC) regulatory framework. Misinterpreting the role of claims can lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure fair and efficient claims handling. The correct approach emphasizes the claims department's dual role, acting as a fiduciary for the insurer by managing its financial exposure, and as a representative of the insurer in fulfilling its contractual obligations to the policyholder. This involves a thorough investigation, objective assessment of coverage, and prompt, fair settlement of valid claims, adhering to all applicable laws and policy terms. This aligns with the AICM's focus on ethical claims practices and regulatory compliance, ensuring that claims are handled with integrity and in accordance with the principles of good faith and fair dealing. An approach that prioritizes solely minimizing payouts without a thorough investigation of the claim's validity would be a regulatory failure. This disregards the policyholder's right to a fair assessment of their claim based on the policy contract and evidence. Such an approach could violate principles of good faith and fair dealing, potentially leading to accusations of bad faith claims handling, which carries significant legal and regulatory consequences. Another incorrect approach, focusing exclusively on customer satisfaction without regard for policy terms and coverage limitations, also represents a regulatory and ethical failure. While customer service is important, it cannot supersede the contractual agreement between the insurer and the policyholder. Paying claims that are not covered by the policy would be a breach of fiduciary duty to the insurer and could lead to financial instability for the company. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the claim against the policy contract and relevant regulations. This includes gathering all necessary information, conducting a fair and objective investigation, determining coverage based on policy language and applicable laws, communicating clearly with the policyholder, and making a settlement decision that is both compliant and equitable. Professionals should consult internal guidelines, legal counsel, and regulatory resources when in doubt. Question 18. The investigation demonstrates a claimant presenting with a documented chronic back condition. The claimant's medical records indicate significant pain and limitations in lifting and prolonged standing. However, the claimant's employment history shows a progression of roles, including physically demanding positions, and the claimant states they can still perform light-duty tasks, which approach best aligns with the principles of thorough claims investigation and fair adjudication. Option A. Requesting a detailed functional capacity evaluation, FCE, and obtaining updated job descriptions for all relevant past and present roles to objectively assess the claimant's current physical capabilities against occupational demands. Option B. Denying the claim based on the claimant's past ability to perform physically demanding jobs, assuming their current condition is not significantly different without further medical review. Option C. Relying solely on the medical diagnosis provided, without considering the functional limitations described or the claimant's employment history, to determine disability. Option D. Accepting the claimant's self-reported ability to perform light-duty tasks as sufficient evidence of their capacity to work, despite the medical records indicating significant limitations. The correct answer is A. Requesting a detailed functional capacity evaluation, FCE, and obtaining updated job descriptions for all relevant past and present roles to objectively assess the claimant's current physical capabilities against occupational demands. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a claims professional must reconcile conflicting information from medical records and employment history to accurately assess a claimant's disability. This is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of how medical conditions impact an individual's ability to perform their job duties, and how past employment experiences might inform current capabilities or limitations. The claims professional must navigate potential discrepancies, ensure fairness to the claimant, and adhere to regulatory requirements for claims adjudication. Careful judgment is required to avoid premature conclusions and to gather all necessary information for a well-supported decision. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of all provided medical documentation, cross-referencing it with the claimant's stated employment history and job descriptions. This approach prioritizes gathering comprehensive evidence to establish a clear understanding of the claimant's functional capacity in relation to their occupational demands. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing disability claims, mandate that decisions be based on objective evidence and a fair assessment of the claimant's condition and its impact on their ability to work. This method ensures that the claims professional is acting in accordance with the principles of due diligence and fair claims handling, by seeking to understand the full picture before making a determination. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the claimant's self-reported limitations without corroborating medical evidence, or, conversely, to dismiss the claimant's reported difficulties based solely on the absence of specific medical diagnoses, even if the medical records indicate functional impairments. Another incorrect approach would be to make assumptions about the claimant's ability to perform other types of work based on their medical condition, without a vocational assessment or clear evidence of transferable skills and available suitable employment. These approaches fail to meet the regulatory obligation to conduct a thorough investigation and to base decisions on all relevant and available evidence, potentially leading to unfair outcomes and regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core question of disability. This involves gathering all relevant documentation, including medical records, employment history, and job descriptions. The next step is to analyze this information for consistency and discrepancies, seeking clarification where necessary. A critical evaluation of the claimant's functional capacity in relation to their occupational duties, supported by medical evidence, is paramount. Finally, the decision should be documented thoroughly, with clear justification based on the evidence reviewed, and in compliance with all applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. Question 19. During the evaluation of a complex property damage claim where the claimant is experiencing significant financial hardship and is pressuring for an immediate payout, a claims handler is presented with incomplete documentation and conflicting witness statements. The handler feels sympathetic to the claimant's situation and is aware that a quick resolution would alleviate their distress. What is the most ethically sound approach for the claims handler to adopt? Option A. Offer a partial payment based on the undisputed portion of the claim while continuing to investigate the remaining elements, clearly communicating the conditions for the additional payment. Option B. Advise the claimant to seek legal counsel due to the complexity and potential for dispute, and suspend further investigation until legal representation is confirmed. Option C. Inform the claimant that payment cannot be made until all documentation is complete and all witness statements are fully corroborated, and outline the necessary steps for them to provide this information. Option D. Expedite the payment of the claim based on the claimant's hardship and the pressure to resolve quickly, while noting the incomplete documentation for future review. The correct answer is D. Expedite the payment of the claim based on the claimant's hardship and the pressure to resolve quickly, while noting the incomplete documentation for future review. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the claims handler to balance the claimant's immediate financial needs with the insurer's obligation to investigate thoroughly and prevent fraudulent claims. The pressure to expedite payment, potentially influenced by the claimant's emotional state or perceived urgency, can conflict with the duty to act with integrity and adhere to established claims handling procedures. Careful judgment is required to ensure fairness to the claimant while upholding the principles of ethical claims management. The correct approach involves a commitment to thorough investigation and documentation, even when faced with pressure. This means gathering all necessary information, verifying details, and making a decision based on the evidence and policy terms, rather than succumbing to external pressure or making assumptions. This aligns with the core ethical principles of honesty, fairness, and due diligence expected of claims professionals. Specifically, it upholds the duty to act in good faith towards the insured and claimants, which includes a fair and impartial investigation of all claims. Regulatory frameworks for claims handling typically mandate that all claims be investigated promptly and fairly, with decisions based on objective evidence and policy provisions. An incorrect approach would be to expedite payment without adequate verification. This could lead to paying a fraudulent claim, which is a breach of the insurer's duty to its policyholders and can have significant financial repercussions. It also undermines the integrity of the claims process. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the claimant's concerns or delay the investigation unnecessarily due to a personal bias or a desire to avoid difficult conversations. This demonstrates a lack of empathy and fairness, violating the ethical obligation to treat all claimants with respect and to conduct a timely and impartial investigation. Failing to document the investigation process thoroughly is also an ethical failure, as it prevents accountability and can lead to disputes about the decision-making process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the ethical dilemma, recognizing the conflict between expediency and thoroughness. 2. Gathering relevant information, collecting all facts, policy details, and evidence. 3. Identifying stakeholders and their interests, considering the claimant, the insurer, and other policyholders. 4. Evaluating options against ethical principles and regulatory requirements, assessing each potential course of action for its fairness, honesty, and compliance. 5. Making a reasoned decision, choosing the option that best upholds ethical standards and legal obligations. 6. Documenting the decision and rationale, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 20. System analysis indicates that a claims professional is assigned a claim where the claimant is a close personal friend from their university days. The claims professional has not seen this friend in over 10 years, but they maintain occasional contact through social media. The claims professional believes they can remain objective and handle the claim fairly based on the policy terms and the facts presented. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims professional? Option A. Inform the claimant of the past acquaintance and assure them that it will not influence the claim handling, then proceed with the claim. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and the compliance department and request guidance on how to proceed, which may include reassignment of the claim. Option C. Attempt to manage the potential conflict internally by ensuring all documentation is thorough and decisions are well justified, believing this will mitigate any perceived bias. Option D. Proceed with handling the claim as assigned, confident in their ability to remain objective and fair due to the long period of infrequent contact. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their supervisor and the compliance department and request guidance on how to proceed, which may include reassignment of the claim. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the claims professional to balance competing interests and maintain objectivity, which is fundamental to the integrity of the claims management process. The core of the challenge lies in the potential for personal relationships or affiliations to influence professional judgment, leading to biased decision-making. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all claims are handled impartially and in accordance with policy terms and applicable regulations, regardless of any personal connections. The correct approach involves immediate disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate supervisor or designated compliance officer. This action allows the organization to implement measures to mitigate the conflict, such as reassigning the claim or implementing enhanced oversight. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with regulatory requirements that mandate transparency and the avoidance of situations that could impair professional judgment. By proactively disclosing, the claims professional upholds their duty of loyalty to the employer and the principles of fair claims handling. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with handling the claim without disclosing the relationship. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of ethical codes and potentially regulatory requirements that emphasize impartiality and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. It creates an appearance of impropriety, even if no actual bias occurred, and erodes trust in the claims process. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the conflict internally by downplaying its significance or believing that personal objectivity can be maintained without external review. This approach ignores the inherent risk that even well-intentioned individuals can be unconsciously influenced by personal relationships. It also bypasses established organizational procedures designed to safeguard against such conflicts. A further incorrect approach would be to delay disclosure until after a decision has been made on the claim. This is problematic because it suggests an attempt to conceal the conflict or to present a fait accompli. It undermines the purpose of disclosure, which is to allow for proactive management of the conflict before any potentially biased decisions are made. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's conflict of interest policy and relevant ethical guidelines. When a potential conflict arises, the professional should first identify the nature of the relationship or interest that could create a conflict. Second, they should assess the potential impact of this conflict on their ability to perform their duties impartially. Third, they must consult their internal policies and, if necessary, seek guidance from their supervisor or compliance department. The paramount principle is to prioritize transparency and to act in a manner that preserves the integrity and fairness of the claims handling process.